had some competition with the Wildlife Film Festival, and this week I think it's more of the weather, but we're very pleased to see you here and we have the support. Tonight we have a change of pace. Last week we had some poetry. This week we have an excerpt from a novel. And our guest reader tonight is Boston's Reid. You may have seen him around the community. He's worked with the police department for 16 years now. And during that time, he's also published 6 novels, which is quite an inspiration to those of us who think that we don't have enough time in our lives to write. He is originally from Illinois, and he came out here in 1975 to attend the Creative Writing Department graduate school at the University of Montana. As I said, he's published 6 novels, and his most recent one is called Wild Animals, and it was published in January. So would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Reid?
You all for put my glasses on. Wasting this weather. It's just a beautiful evening, but I appreciate you coming tonight. What I picked out to read tonight is something from a previous novel called The Red Corvette that came out a few years ago. It's in 1993. And I'll just explain a little bit. It's always odd when you read from novels because you can't tell the whole story or anything like that. What this is about is a retired police detective in a town called Rosette in Montana, which is based on Missoula. I made up a town since I work with the police department. It seemed vastly simpler to do that. And this guy's name is Leo Banks. He's from a little town back in Illinois. And when he was younger, going to school, he was roommates with a guy named Jerry Heyman. And they were best friends, and Banks dated a woman named Sarah at the time. They broke up, and Heyman ended up marrying her. And so they've come out to Montana to hunt Banks up. And Heyman has a reason for this. And the reason is sort of based on a story that's part of my childhood. Is actually the reason I wanted to write this novel, so I could tell this story. The neighboring farm that I grew up on, back in 1922, there was a retarded farmhand that raped and murdered a 12-year-old girl. And he was sort of cashiered out of that place really quickly. And when I was talking to my grandfather once about that, after I was older, and I asked him how he heard about what had happened, and he said, well, he was out working along the road cutting some weeds, and a neighbor came by, walking by down the road, and the neighbor had a rope coiled up that he was carrying along with him. He asked him what he was doing. He told him what had happened, and he said he was on the way down the road where they had this guy and they were going to hang him. They ended up not doing that, but my grandpa would never tell me if he went with him or not. So I don't know. He's 93 now, and I'm going to see him in May. Maybe I'll finally get him to tell me that. Probably won't have many more chances. But this guy, the girl, was buried in a family cemetery near there. And after that, her family just sort of disintegrated and fell apart and died off, and the farm was sold and the house burned down, and so all that exists there now is this old cemetery. And the guy that really did it ended up pleading guilty. They had to move him out of town and keep him in another jail in a bigger town so that he wouldn't be lynched. But it was the oddest thing. I work at the police department, and so I know that the average sentence that people serve today for murder is 7 years nationally. Well, this guy went into prison in Illinois, and he was there almost 16 years. And in the time that he was there, he never left the prison, the property of the prison. He never had a visitor, never had a phone call, and never had a letter. And when they finally released him when he was an old man, when they gave him a ride into town, that was the first time he'd ever ridden in a car. So that was the story I'd been looking for a way to try and tell. And so I sort of concocted this way to tell this story, to build it into this novel. What I'm going to read tonight happens after Jerry and Sarah Heyman have found Banks, and they're out at dinner, and Heyman is explaining something that he wants Banks to do, so they're in this restaurant, and their two kids are with them too. Rosette, Montana is not an especially formal place, so despite the golden orchid centerpiece and the sprinkling of French entrees on the menu at Stevie's, I was acceptably dressed in tan slacks and a plaid shirt. Jerry looked the part of a physician in his blue blazer, white shirt and tie. Sarah was trim and lovely in a yellow cotton dress, simple enough that I was sure I had owned pickup trucks that cost less money. An ivory-colored cameo hung from her neck on a thin gold chain. She didn't need the soft light inside Stevie's, but it didn't do her any harm either. Dinner came off without a hitch, at least until the food started showing up. The grown-ups had grilled salmon while the kids were forced to make do with shrimp cocktail, steak Diane cooked in brandy flames at the table, and chocolate double fudge sundaes, each especially ordered with 2 cherries on top. Lisa was as genteel as any human, that's the daughter, as any human could be with such a load of food to dispose of, but Michael ate like a turban. Afterward, when he asked the astonished waiter for a toothpick, Sarah pummeled him with one of those motherly looks. You know, the kind that reminds you of candy-coated death. Once in a while, I caught myself staring at Sarah, wondering how it would feel if she were directing those do something with the kid looks at me instead of Jerry. Across the river, the evening light fell easily among the pale green trunks and branches of a grove of young cottonwoods. About halfway out, a fisherman made long casts in fluid yellow arcs, which settled onto the water and rode the current downstream. As he watched the fisherman, Jerry Heyman toyed absently with his blue and red tie and seemed to become lost in the delicate, hypnotic twirl of the yellow line. Sarah smiled at me and put her hand on Jerry's arm. My husband could empty an LL Bean warehouse, she said. Jerry glanced down at his wifed hand, then at me. It just looked so perfect out there. I said, "You've never tried it? Perhaps he could use his children for bait." Okay, so I was not in the best humor. When I knew him at school, Jerry talked a lot about moving west, about the kind of harmony that people in the late 60s thought derived from a certain geography. While Sarah was actively political, Jerry, in his calm, deliberate manner, always wanted a world that made sense and, above all, was compassionate. It was that kind of thinking, I decided, that probably drew him to medicine. Not such a bad thing, really. I mean, the world could always use more doctors. But when it came to the West, Jerry's was the kind of thinking that 20 years ago made John Denver the Caruso of hot tubs, and today caused some people to believe that the relationship between wolves and deer is painless simply because it's pure. Time, Jerry shook his head and sipped a glass of wine. He looked at me and blinked his eyes as though trying to bring them into focus. You know how it goes, Leo, just ordinary time. There's almost always somebody out there fishing about this time of day, I said. I've heard people say he's hired by the restaurant, but that's not true. That story came from a book. There was a guy who wrote a novel about this hippie living in Rosette. The hippie gets a job as a scenic fly fisherman outside a fancy restaurant. That's where the story comes from, about 10 years ago. A few people read the book and talked about it, and now everybody thinks that guy out there in the river is nothing but an actor. With the nail of his little finger, Michael gouged a piece of food from between his lower incisors. That's the kind of job you should have got, Dad. A few moments later, I sensed the boy staring at the scar on my throat. Banks got his throat cut several years ago. A moment of stupidity, I said lightly, brushing the finger against the scar. Sarah rushed to correct him. Michael. No, I said, it's okay. Mom told us you were in the Navy, he said. I was, but I didn't do anything risky enough to get this. This was from a bad dope deal when I was working undercover a long time ago. I wasn't smart enough to know I could get hurt, so a man did me a favor and taught me. I still can't believe you became a cop, Jerry said, refilling his wine glass. We're the perfect generation, I said. We started the drug revolution, and now we've turned it into the war on drugs. Schizophrenic, Sarah said. Her tone was acidic. She pursed her lips as though tasting a bad kiss, then folded her napkin and laid it over her plate, which was still half full. We were convinced we knew what we wanted, then had the bad luck to get it. Jerry shrugged an apology for it, then looked back out at the fisherman. I thought fondly of the moment when I could refile this artifact from my past life where it belonged, under O for over. When Jerry said he'd like coffee and cognac, I suggested something called a Nick's Special, a blend of amaretto and metoxylate that a friend of mine in Montana had learned from some drug coppers back in L.A. Sarah protested that she and the kids were worn out. After some discussion, Jerry and I decided to stay on for a while. She would go back to the motel with the kids, and I could give Jerry a ride back later on. After she was gone, Jerry tossed back his drink and nodded appreciatively. "I'm sorry, Leo," he scowled into the empty snifter. This seemed like a good idea back when we were in the middle of South Dakota. I laughed. Lots of things seem like a good idea in the middle of South Dakota. "I always thought this would happen the other way around," Heyman said. "You know, sometime when you'd come back to Illinois and visit your hometown, you'd just pop in on us." I laughed again. "You might have needed to wait another 20 years. You've never been back?" I shook my head. "There's no traumatic reason for it. It's just the way things worked out." That wasn't quite true, but given Jerry's mood, it was all the truth I wanted to be responsible for. In fact, I had been back several times and always made it a point to avoid Moldestar. That's the town where the Haymans lived. The reasons which seemed obvious to me had nothing to do with Jerry or Sarah alone, and everything to do with them together. If he wasn't smart enough to have figured that out on his own, what was the point in telling him now? The air of assurance I'd seen in Heyman before was gone. I guess the way things were back then, with the three of us, Jerry, I said, "It's okay, it's done. As far as I'm concerned, two old friends stopped in for a visit, a nice dinner beside the lovely river, a couple of slots in the slide tray for the neighbors back home, end of story." He shook his head and frowned. "Sarah's smarter than me about some things. It turns out maybe I'm not as grown up about this as I expected." "Then why are you here?" Without warning, I felt myself slip into an investigative frame of mind. What did this man, old friend or not, want from me? I sat waiting, and as I waited, I felt my face go blank. "Am I that transparent?" he said. "Everybody wants something, Jerry. That's the reason we keep on getting up in the morning. It's lying about it that gets us in trouble." He motioned to the waiter for another round. "And you think I've been lying? Well, it's a cinch you didn't come here to improve your marriage." Jerry arched his eyebrows and whistled softly between his teeth. "No, not for that. The truth is, I think I need an investigator sort of, and I couldn't think of anybody but you." "You're in trouble?" "Me? Oh, Christ, no. You forget I'm Dr. Heyman, healer of the sick, pillar of Moldestar, Illinois. And before that, I was little Jerry, the nicest boy in town. Hell, Leo, I couldn't get into trouble to save my life." The waiter arrived with our drinks. I pushed mine aside while Jerry dipped his fingertip into the drink, then touched the finger to his lips. "I'm sorry, Leo. I just thought, if we could get together and decide we were all still friends, then maybe you'd be more likely to help me out." He drained off the second Nick's Special. "Sarah told me it was a rotten thing to do." "She was right," I said. "Maybe you should tell me why it is you need my kind of help." Outside, the fishermen had waded to the shore. The wind had begun to roll out of Bride's Canyon, tearing fine shreds of spray from the churning slate-colored river. Tell the right kind of ghost story and you get a haunted man. That was Gerald Heyman's particular brand of trouble. In the nearly empty restaurant, I could hear the wind drawing under the eaves. Heyman polished off his drink, then mine, then waved for another. I watched the shadows from the young cottonwoods play across the water. "You were smarter than me," Heyman said finally, "about leaving home, I mean. Going back, it's been like slipping my neck inside a noose of cobwebs." "It's not a matter of smarts," I said. "It's easy to mistake luck for a plan." "I was a farm kid," Heyman said, "remember?" I nodded. "And your dad was a school teacher, too. English? History. Our farm wasn't very big, so he was able to teach and run the farm both. He's retired now, of course. Neither my sister nor I had any interest in taking over the farm, so he sold it. That was about 10 years ago. Now he and my mother live in Florida. She plays bridge, he plays kamikaze golf." Heyman's face took on a wistful light. If he was waiting for me to reciprocate with some news out of my own deep, dark past, he was wasting even more of my time. Finally, Jerry got the point of my silence and went on. When I was a little kid, my father told me about a murder that happened on the farm next to us. Did I ever tell you that story? He hadn't. The murder happened in 1937, he went on. Otto Turk, that's the name of the neighbor, was married to a wealthy woman, a kind of heiress, I suppose you'd call her, from St. Louis. They had a son, Matthew, who was something like 14 or 15 that year. On his own, Turk was just another small-time farmer like most of my people were too. But like I said, Grace Turk had money. After they were married, they built a huge stone house on his farm, and he started buying up more and more land. One afternoon in late May, the boy comes home from school, finds his mother floating face down in a pond not far from the house, deader than last year's celebrities. The Turks had this hired man living with them, a retarded kid named Mickey Cochran. Not a kid, really. He was almost as old as Otto, but my father always called him a kid. Heyman studied the gold-colored orchid in the center of the table. Kind of funny, isn't it? How so? Cochran, he's probably 10 years older than my dad, but he's still a kid. That's what we do to retarded people, you know. Stop counting their years when their minds stop growing. I guess there are all kinds of calendars, I said. Heyman extended his hand and gently touched the petals of the orchid with his fingertips. He scowled as though considering a diagnosis. Otto Turk immediately accused Cochran. Heyman withdrew his hand and rubbed his fingertips against his thumb. I guess justice was easier in those days. The sheriff impaneled a coroner's jury that same night in the Turk house. Cochran was arrested and in the county jail by midnight. It was bad enough that Grace Turk was murdered, a pretty young wife and mother, decent woman from a well-off family. But there was also some evidence she'd been raped. Put all that together and you got a real ugly crowd outside the jail. Late that first night at the jail, according to Jerry, the local prosecutor and the sheriff had a talk with Cochran. By the time they were through, he had confessed to both the murder and rape. A few months later, he tried to recant the confession, but the judge wasn't having any of it. And that fall, while the jury was still being selected for his trial, Cochran changed his plea to guilty. Because of his slow-wittedness and the fact that he pled guilty, he was sentenced to life in prison rather than death in the electric chair. A few days later, he was sent to Menard State Prison in Chester. It was really dark now, nearly dark now, and the evening wind had brought clouds down from Bryant's Canyon. Rain began to nick at the large window. Heyman stared into his empty snifter, looked around for the waiter, and then changed his mind. I said, lots of people have a story like this, Jerry, something that came to them very young. He laughed. That sounds like you're leading up to asking me what all this has to do with you. I settled back in my chair and waited, thinking that it must be quite a luxury to be haunted by only one murder. You have a story like that, Leo? Now I laughed. I guess I probably do, or did anyway. If so, it's gotten all mixed up since then with too many other stories. Old friend or not, I wasn't inclined to give him more than that. And anyway, the story I might tell would be the story of me and his wife. I doubt if he was in the mood to hear that. Grace Turk taught me about death, he said. I know she was dead a long time before I was even born, but just the same, I learned from her. Grace Turk was buried in a small family cemetery that joined the Heyman farm. When Jerry was a kid, he went on to tell me, he discovered the place on his own. It was all grown up with weeds and brush. Some of the graves were over a century old and now marked only by the shallow depressions left by collapsed coffins. Grace Turk was the last person buried there. In some places, he said, animals had burrowed down into the graves and used the coffins for dens. I used to go there and play. That was the first place I realized things happen in the world. Things outside your own life, I mean. Terrible things you might never understand, but you have to try. That must sound pretty crazy. Nothing's truly crazy about death, I said. We're not that lucky. I knew you'd say something like that. That's why I knew you were the only person who might help. You still haven't told me what kind of help it is you want. Heyman slowly ran his hand back and forth over his high forehead, as though trying physically to sort through his thoughts. He said, I've done some reading about homicide convictions. You were a cop for a long time. You know the average time a guy serves in this country for homicide? Last I heard it was about 7 years, I said. He pointed a finger at me and dropped his thumb like the hammer of a gun. Very good. That's the same figure I read. Well, last month I went to see Mickey Cochran. Where do you think I saw him? Pakistan, for all I knew. I wish my old friend hadn't needed so many drinks working up to his big finish. Menard, he said, that's where I saw him, still in Menard. Not a bad stretch, I said. That's over 50 years. He shook his head incredulously. What do you want me to say, Jerry? You want me to say 50 years is too much just because 7 isn't enough? He ignored me. Cochran was an orphan. He ran away from a foundling home in Missouri when he was 9 or 10. Somehow he ended up around Movistar, where different farm families more or less passed him around until he landed with the Turks. In all those 50-plus years inside Menard, Cochran never had a visitor, never had a letter, never wrote one, no phone calls, nothing, as if he'd been dropped into a black hole. I was personally acquainted with some murderers who could use a hole like that. In 20 years of policing, I had never known a life sentence actually to mean forever. I said, what about parole? Like you said, 7 years is the average ride. Sooner or later, everybody gets parole. He must be a real peach for them to hang on to him that long. Heyman shook his head abruptly. Never asked. The police at the prison said there's no reason for it except the poor dumb jerk never asked. So you appointed him yourself his first visitor. He waved me off. Give me a break, Leo, okay? I may be obsessive about this thing, but I'm not dysfunctional. Sure, I knew all the story from when I was a kid, dug out the old newspapers and all that. Some reporter called him a fiendish brute of the field, a beast. Can you imagine that? But it's not like I've made the guy my life's work. Heyman went on to explain that Cochran was dying, and the state of Illinois in its wisdom had decided that he should die on the outside. So whether Mickey Cochran wanted it or not, he was getting kicked. Since he'd been convicted out of Movistar, that was where they would send him to die. Jerry Heyman was the only medicine show in town, which meant that once Cochran was moved into the local nursing home, he was bound to be Jerry's patient. Jerry had been asked to check Cochran's medical record in advance of the move. Because of his childhood interest in the case, Jerry took the opportunity to visit Cochran while he was still in the joint. The thing is, Leo, Heyman said, I don't think this guy did it. We talked for a long time and he says he didn't. I believe him, simple as that. I didn't want to patronize my friend, but I was sure I knew more about cons than he did. There's something you should understand, Jerry. A lot of these guys behind the walls, guilt is something they check at the gate with their street clothes. The guy confessed, for Christ's sake, pled guilty. Saying you're innocent doesn't make it so. Is that what you want me to investigate, a murder that's half a century old and the guy rolled on it from the very start? You don't have to make it sound so trite, he said. I can't help the way it sounds. Look, you're a doctor. How much time do you spend trying to raise the dead? The haunted look in Heyman's eyes hardened into determination, perhaps even contempt. I can pay you if that's what it is. I came to see you because I remembered you as the kind of man who would help out on this thing. I've got a successful practice, damn successful, and I don't heal the sick for free, at least not all the time. Just tell me what you need. I straightened and wondered if it wasn't time to reach for the check and start calculating the tip. I gave that up, I said. The world doesn't need another ex-cop on a fool's errand. Then think about this, Heyman said. Not long after he buried Grace, Otto Turk did a weird thing. He moved out of that big stone house, got drunk as a lord, then smashed all the windows, and after that he just left the place standing. The damn thing is still there, like this kind of great big stone skull. So what? I might have done the same thing, so might you. And Cochran's denial, he said. I'd already told him what I thought of Cochran's denial, and I wasn't in the mood to tell him again. Listen, I said, if this job's so important to you, get somebody in Movistar to do it. Hell, do it yourself. There's no great trick to being an investigator. Just make yourself a pain in the neck. I didn't tell him that he seemed to be well on the way. I didn't tell him that he seemed to be well on his way to learning that great trade secret. I considered that, he said. It's not something a hometown boy can do. You're from one of those little towns yourself, Leo. You know how they are. Yes, I knew. When I was in the 8th grade, we were taught about the Red Menace from a book by J. Edgar Hoover. Some parents complained that Hoover's text was a little soft. And then John Kennedy was killed. Folks were sorry that the president was dead, but if a president had to go, well, this one was better than some others they could think of. And then with Bobby, ditto. In Movistar, I figured convicted murderers were probably just one notch above big city liberal Democrats and Soviet agents. Thinking about Jerry Heyman's part of the world made me feel all cramped up inside, the way I felt whenever I dwelled too long on any of my bum marriages. Jerry's shoulders slumped now as though he were sinking with a huge anchor of sadness tied to his ankles. I didn't feel I didn't like feeling that I was part of that weight, but I liked even less the thought of perpetuating his delusion by telling him lies. Maybe, he said, I've read To Kill a Mockingbird too many times. You always want to believe that some heroic man will stand up against the town, rescue the misunderstood innocent. I'd already spent more nights than he could imagine trying to shore up my own character. It's worse than that, Larry, or Jerry. You want to be that man. It doesn't happen like that, does it, he said. It's a great part, I said, but Gregory Peck already played it. Quickly, he reached for the check and then for his wallet. You'd be better advised not to misunderstand in the first place, he said. A better man than I would have argued harder to get the check. But when Jerry pulled out his wallet and started culling out the 20s from the 50s and 100s, it didn't take me long to surrender to my lower instincts. He had ended up with Sarah and 2 nice kids in a Buick that had to be worth at least dinner in the bar tab. I'd parked my truck under a large blue and white canvas awning, so we managed to avoid the rain. The downpour was in earnest now, one of those sudden explosive storms that could drop out of the mountains without warning in early summer. The air was cool, and I could smell the nearby spruce trees along with the willows and lilacs that crowded the parking lot. I started the truck and headed for Heyman's motel. You said your father told you this story, Jerry. You didn't say what he thought about it. He was a better teacher than that, Heyman said. He never came right out and told me what he thought. He said he learned about the murder while he was chopping weeds along the road. Another neighbor came walking by on his way to the Turk place, and the neighbor had a rope coiled over his shoulder. So what did your pop do, I said, stay home or go along? He never said. You're right, I told him, he was a good teacher. Maybe, Heyman said, but he didn't sound convinced. Maybe he just never wanted me to know. You ask him again, I said. Chances are he'll tell you now that school's out. Heyman looked across at me. He was smiling at the shadow of the windshield wiper passing back and forth across his face. Maybe I just don't want to know, he said. We have a hard enough time living with our own sins, Jerry, I said, all of us. I turned into the motel and saw the Buick parked at the back of the court near the low brick wall that surrounded the pool. The heated water gave off steam, and the underwater lights cast a rippling aqua glow across the 2-story fieldstone structure that rose behind the pool. When Heyman opened his door, I could smell the chlorine. I asked him if he wanted to meet me for breakfast in the morning. He was both polite and firm in saying that they needed to get on the road very early. I wish we were leaving in this old car I want to buy, a Corvette, he said. A red 62 Corvette, a real cherry, a serious traveling car. That depends, I said, on what kind of traveling you've got in mind. The look on Heyman's face said he wasn't looking for the kind of route I'm getting dry. The look on Heyman's face said he wasn't looking for the kind of route they give you at the auto club. He went on. This old guy back in Movistar, he's got it stashed in a shed behind his house. I really want to buy that car, Leo. Buy it and just go for a drive, a nice long drive. You're a rich doctor, I said. Buy the son of a bitch. Rich doctors can do anything. His grin was crooked. Yeah, sure they can. I don't know why, maybe because of the sadness I heard in Heyman's voice. I said, you've got good kids, Jerry. I'm glad I got to meet your kids. When Jerry didn't say anything, I decided that the remark must have sounded as lame to him as it had to me. We finished up an elaborate set of goodbyes which had the ring of forever about them. It was almost as though we had both maintained our long-distance friendship for 20 years just to see how we would handle this moment. As Heyman was about to close the door, he stopped and leaned unsteadily into the truck. You still remember why you became a cop, Leo? I needed a job, I said. I'm a doctor, he said, because Sarah told me she always wanted to be married to a doctor. Way back when we were in school in Illinois, she always said that. Did she ever tell you that? You ever know her as well as you thought? No, I said. Yeah. He took a deep breath and let it out, filling the cab with the sticky odor of stale booze. That's what she always said. I used to think about you, when I'd get a letter or something, and I tried to imagine what your life, your work, what must be like out here. He hesitated while he loosened his tie. I guess I always kind of envied you, living a life you invented to suit just yourself. Then you were a fool, I said. Yeah, well, big deal, he said. He pulled down the tie from his neck and wrapped it around the knuckles of his left hand. See you around. He slammed the door and walked into the steam of the rippling blue light. So that's how that starts. Van Halen gets killed. So I changed that story around to fit the novel I wanted to write, but I got that out of my system.
Your peers at the police force, do they critique your writing? Do they look at it and say, BS on this?
Not too much, no.
Are they interested?
Some are, kind of my friends are, and a few other guys. Most probably aren't, or don't say anything. So, not a lot of interaction. I've been there long enough that who I am when I do is kind of part of the furniture. It's not too bad, it's kind of.
Do each of your books start with something personal within a story within?
Yes and no. Most of the police stuff isn't really personal. It kind of generically is, I guess, but it's not real stuff that I've done. This one has this personal story built into it, and then the novel that I just sent off that I'm trying to get somebody to take down, just sent off a couple weeks ago, has more personal things built into it still. So it's hard when you do these crime things, these things. That's always the stuff that I want to put in, and it's always the stuff editors want to cut out. It doesn't have anything to do with the story, with the mystery or whatever. So you have to be kind of subversive.
Now, what did you just say? I missed.
Oh.
I guess what you were thinking should be in the story and your editors cut.
Well, the personal, yeah. I mean, I sort of take with Banks stories from my own personal history and make them his, or in this case, this other guy's. But if you don't do it just right and sort of bury them in there, then editors usually want you to cut them out because they feel like they become distracted with the action. All that stuff that they think will make it lots of fun, but it doesn't.
Do you tend to write in the first person?
Both.
Which
Yeah.
is easier for you?
About the same now. The newest novel is third person, and then the first police novel is third person too. And I did the Banks character because I wanted a first person character, and there are 3 books with him. And then I went back to one of the characters, the third person characters from the first one, just so I'd have the 2 situations to write, 2 voices to write. So I was getting tired of writing the first person.
Do you word process? Do you write it in the word process, or do you write it at home?
No, it's all.
Although it's interesting to me in the conversation that Banks is having with Jerry here about the murder, Banks is thinking, I wish I were haunted by only one murder. And that was really interesting to me because I know that you investigated a number of murders yourself. And yet you choose to write about a murder from your childhood rather than a murder that you investigated as an officer. Can you talk about that a little?
Well, the only reason for doing that is it's not a psychological one or anything like that. It's just, I guess, a practical one. It just seemed really complicated to me to write about stuff that I've really done, especially since I keep doing that, because I don't want people to get the idea that anything they tell me is going to end up in the books and like you sort of steal their life out from them. So that's the reason for that. As I've been there longer and that stuff gets more in the past and I get closer to retiring, I may pull up some more stuff later on. just seem kind of clumsy, kind of unfair.
I've got another question. When, in the book, when Banks went back to investigate Jerry's death,
Yeah.
everyone he encountered said, "Oh, so you're the detective from New Mexico, from Wyoming, from Idaho, from..." I mean, you deliberately punctuated that he was from Montana
Yeah.
by having everyone say that he was from somewhere else. What was that about?
So that happens when I go back to Illinois. Everybody that I meet, that I run into, even when I was a kid, they say, "Oh, you live in South Dakota now." "Oh, aren't you living in Wyoming?" Because it's such a, I mean, to a lot of people back there, the town is about 80 miles from St. Louis. And a trip to St. Louis is a major undertaking, you know. There are people there who don't understand why anybody would even want to go to St. Louis. Because you can hear the Cardinals on the radio. So that happens to me. I mean, anything west of Missouri is the same place. It's all the same place. It's just out there. No one really takes a look. I've got a cousin who has a daughter who lives in Seattle. And he's, I guess, 70 years old now, and she's probably lived there for 15 years, maybe 20. And as far as I know, he's never gone to Seattle to visit her because why would anybody want to go to Seattle? It's that kind of place.
Is that why you live here?
Yeah, it's one reason. I get really weird about that.
Is that the place, or is that anybody going away from home?
I don't know. Probably a little bit of both, I guess. I think it's harder in that place because it's so isolated that nothing ever changes there. And I go back to, you know, when I was 40 years old, my mother was sending me clothes for Christmas in the size I wore when I was 15. But that's just, you know, she hadn't seen me. I see it. I mean, I'm exaggerating that. And I see my parents, and I get along. We get along fine. There's no problem there. It's just a tiny little place. It's very strange. It catches you people by surprise, too, because it seems like it should be in the South, in West Virginia or Tennessee or something like that. But it's still
You have a book, hardback out recently. Is that a Leo Banks?
No, that's the other character. His name is Reid. He's one of the characters from Big Sky Blues.
Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Well, it has to do with a political campaign. This guy is running for the Senate. Well, and this is based on something I kind of did. He's running for the Senate, and there's a former president that's coming to do this campaign stuff. And before the novel opens, someone has blown up a helicopter at a logging site. They think it's some eco-terrorist and stuff. And everybody thinks that they know who did it. And so the campaign is real concerned that this guy, whose name is Henry Skelton, is going to be some kind of threat by trying to kill the former president who's up there with him. So the Secret Service has to investigate him. And this local cop, Bartell, gets paired up with the Secret Service to work on that part of that, to check into this stuff. And then he, as it turns out, doesn't like being checked into. But that comes from some stuff I did when Carter was here and Gore and the Secret Service did that movie. They hook up with one of the local guys, I think just to placate us and keep us out of their hair. It's kind of funny. You have to get your suit out and wear your sunglasses. I told the guys, but there's a stance you have to learn to stand like this.
What is your writing schedule like, and how do you fit it in with your working schedule?
Depending on, well, I work 4-day work weeks, we work 10-hour days. So I always have a 3-day weekend. And then if I'm rewriting, and can do it when I'm tired, I'll sometimes work in the take a nap and then work in the evenings, like from 10 to midnight or something like that. And if I'm not rewriting and have to be fresh, then I get up early, like at 4:30, a couple nights. That seems to work.
Does this come naturally, or do you have to discipline yourself to do that?
Not anymore, I don't so much, yeah. I've been doing it for so long, it's just the other way around now. If I go more than a week without getting something, then I get really irritated. And it's easier now, my daughter's all grown up. It's just me and my wife at home. That looks okay. I would be happy to only have one thing to do. Let's try with that.
You have a really fabulous poem in The Last Best Place. It's a terrific poem.
Oh, which?
An apology, is that the name
Oh,
of it?
yeah, for my partner and I.
Yeah,
Apology,
yeah. Do you write much poetry anymore? When did you write that?
God, I wrote that, I guess, probably in 1984, 85. I started out as a poet when I was in graduate school here, and I just kind of evolved out of it. One of the things when Dick Hugo, when I was a student, he always told us that what you're really learning to do when you're learning to write is to find a way to do it for a long time. And I reached the point where I realized that I can make up fiction and invent fiction, but I can't make up poems. And I can sort of do them if they came along there. But that's, you can't do that your whole life. So it's just the way my mind, I guess, drifted away. So thanks, I'm glad you liked that.
All right, I suppose I can introduce myself. Well, I'm Joe Dawson. I'm a senior at Hellgate High School. I don't know, what more can I say? I'm heavily involved in everything I can get my hands into, and then I go insane. It's about enough. And this is just some poetry I wrote for class, and some for just outside writing of, just various things that I threw together on the spur of the moment, and I'm going to read. Put myself on the spot here. So unless anybody has any complaints, I'm going to start. This one is entitled Dreams. These are some poems, by the way, in case I forgot to mention that. One for my one lost moment, which throws aimless sky in pieces against my window pane, opened into my beating heart, cracked with unknown provisions. Two, for my two dead eyes, who see nothing of self in this rubbery lap track I call me. Three, for my three lies, lying to myself about you, about me, telling myself enchanted moons, exalted by wonder, the invisible rain. Or for my four dreams, dreams of finding my lost moment, dreams of rejuvenated sight, dreams of truthful moons, dreams of undreaming sleep, so that I can escape these whiplash beatings that encompass my day's dream. All right, short little thing. These are all pretty short. This one was an interesting assignment that Mr. Lenahan had us do. This was one where we actually took lines straight out of poems and then put them together into a poem and changed them and added more lines to make it our own poem. So a lot of these are half other people's work, and a lot of them are entirely mine. And I can't really tell the difference anymore. I don't remember which ones are which. But anyways, this is called A Losing Battle. Let your eyes distort into the slice of my distraction, twisted with the emptiness of scorn and noise, toward chaotic skies and ancestral night, torn with breath, toward education, love, emptiness, nervous breakdown, when the children of change shall shatter the love we once were. Saying we must never be afraid, they create your newborn nightmare. Theirs is a living dance upon our dead minds, returning years late, capped with tears transformed, ephemerally unsheathed from reality, universal cruelty. I would bear to dreams your innocent pain, where it can be enveloped. Only this is a viciousness we live. This voracious beast of burden life forgotten. The ice wind is coming, as ever before, ice tears watching, and when I sleep I am a dreaming pool of broken places. I dream some face I read about, sorrow your elemental life. Goodbye, happiness. Goodbye. And okay, and this one I never got around to titling, so I'll consider it untitled. And it's based off of a syllabic pattern from a specific poem, which I have not only forgotten the name of, I have forgotten the author of. Do you happen to know it was?
Was it this term?
Yeah, it was a 1-3-7 something, I think, along those lines.
So you want to hear it already?
Yeah, maybe you'll hear the recognize the sound. I don't know. But the first two lines were Wade with black jade or something along those lines. I don't remember what the name of the poem was.
I'll think of it tonight, late in bed.
Yeah.
Of course.
Fate. Screaming fit, glowing with angry coals and fear, riding with flames and air. Bind, brooding to the sky deep. Within sleep, rites of panic-ridden royalty, rehearsing pedantry, filing the secret filial lies between thighs, oiling the furious angry days with thoughtless roundelays, singing the dreams of furious pleas. Black trees, burnt by dead men forgotten, old suits raining with scarves and flutes, saddened by meaningless frozen thoughts, lost, distraught, thrown through breezes, or disdainful prides of funereal brides, broken, lost by derisive love. All right, so I'll just continue. I'm not going to say anything more. This one's entitled, Remember Me. And written angrily on shredded paper were the words forget and remember. And forget read boldly, seen with blind eyes it gleamed. With heat it burned itself into his mind. And remember read darkness, near invisibility. It struggled in pain to be understood. It was strained, wrinkled, and stained with age and abuse. And between the two words, a beginning. The merest beginning of a tear, of a tear, formed of ecstasy, an agony derived, privileged without understanding, torn form from heart and mind with demanding forced conformity. He looks and turns the page to forget. And it's the last one I brought, so therefore it's going to be the last one I'll read, and it's entitled Waiting for the Boiling Rains. Brutal aims for fears mistaken, watching, waiting for the boiling rains which will wash our frigid lives away, taking all our demanding pain and all our frozen joy, wearing our aimless goals on our empty sleeves, above our hopeless hands, on your blithe body, moving on to awareness, blind in preoccupation, incapable delights, discussing alone with yourself who does not know herself, regaling lies with blurred ambition, brittle with anticipation, broken by hope, bleeding on the other side, but just a little flight. It's all we ask for. Needling these infinite aims with frenzied ceramic pleasure, waiting for the boiling rain, which will wash our hopes away.
I just have one question. You enunciate really, really clearly, more clearly than anyone I've ever heard speak. Is that because of your voice training, or is that your
A lot of things. I've spent 4 years in speech and debate. I've spent 4 years doing drama. I've spent 3 years singing. You learn to enunciate after a while. You just figure out,
Is that something your
They
coaches
feel
are aiming
understand
to
me.
do, or is it just come naturally?
it's just something I've, learned to do. Just from that much time spent working at it. I don't know. I mean, it's possible I enunciated fairly well before that too. I don't really know. I doubt it, considering the number of times my directors have yelled at me for not enunciating enough. But who knows?
I can hear your music in your writing. It's very lyrical, very rhythmic,
Mhm.
flowing.
Yeah, I'll work on rhythm and sort of thing. A lot of music. Hey, I've played the violin for 15 years. It's kind of drilled in there.
You just seem very comfortable with the language.
That's from a lot of reading, I think.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything to drill me with?
You're
Thanks a lot for reading.
very good.
Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Thank you.
Yes.